Today, I like to begin with a brief introduction of myself. I am a historian of science and technology. As many historians of science and technology are, my first degree was in engineering. So I was a material science and engineering major as an undergraduate. And after 4 years of training in engineering, I decided to begin graduate work in history of science and technology in the United States. So it is now over about 25 years since I first began working in this field. And recently I am more interested in the ways in which we tell the story of technology in not only in modern Korea, but more broadly in East Asia or places where places that has that lie outside the what we might call the center or the mostly Western Europe and the United States. I'm interested in anything outside of that sphere. So today I'd like to share some of my reflections as well as introduce some slices of my research so far. In 2000, so that was 25 years ago when I first started out in this field as a fresh engineering graduate, what I found was it was fairly commonplace to understand the field as studying new inventions and how they emerged through time, and to tell that story of the emergence of new inventions. And of course, this is a widespread idea among the public as well. So what I would like you to do for a moment is to imagine that you are a historian of technology, trying to come up with a list of items to include in a historical survey of technology in the 20th century. So what items might you, what comes to mind if you think about the history of technology in the 20th century? What are some of the important critical? Telephone. The telephone was actually the late 19th century. Alexander Graham Bell. Yeah. I'm sorry? Computer. Computer is a good one. If you trace back the historical origins of the computer, you can actually go back to before the 20th century. But the digital computer, as we use it now, emerged around mid-century, using a large number of vacuum tubes that fill this room, around the size of this room, and then it got smaller, right? So the personal computer, as we now know it, was early 1980s. The first IBM computer came out around that time. Of course, there were a few other models that arrived in the late 1970s. So that's a very important thing that we should include if we are to tell the story of technology in the 20th century, of course. Anything else? Mobile phone, slightly later, 1980s, 90s. Okay.
What about radios?
Radios, okay, of course, we have been using radios throughout the 20th century, but the invention was in the late 19th century. So, of course, that transformed the ways in our everyday lives as well. One might begin with the invention of the airplane by Orville and Wilbur Wright, known as the Wright brothers, in 1903. So when we talk about the 20th century, this is frequently brought up as the first major invention of the 20th century. Then the implementation of mass production of the Model T automobile by Ford Motors using interchangeable parts. 1908. The invention of penicillin by the Scottish doctor Alexander Fleming in 1928 was an important episode in history of technology as well as the history of medicine. which was followed by its mass production during World War II. And speaking of World War II, we cannot leave out the development of the atomic bomb in 1945, which helped put the war to an end. Immediately following the war, the invention of the transistor in 1948 served as the foundation for the digital age and, of course, the computer that we are experiencing today. So in the 1970s and 80s, electronics, computer, and internet technologies flourished alongside biotechnology in the 80s and 90s, advanced pharmaceuticals, and later nanotechnology in the 1990s and 2000s. So we can write a fairly good story of 20th century technology through these episodes of major inventions. And seen in this way, humanity has come up with a continuous string of technological progresses from which we have all benefited. So we now live longer, healthier, and all in all, more prosperous lives, thanks in part to our technological ingenuity. It makes all the sense in the world to celebrate these achievements, technological innovations. Okay. Then, in 2011, after spending around 12 years in the United States studying the history of technology, I returned to Korea, got a job back home. And when I came back, I decided to work on the history of technology in my home country. And just to illustrate what my challenges were at that time, let me invite you again to think about a list of items to include in a historical survey of technology in 20th century Korea. So if we were to write a 20th century history of technology in South Korea or Korea as a whole, what would be some of the items that we can include in that story? So yeah, I mean, this is completely open. If we, so say, well, last semester I taught a course in my home institution called Science and Technology in 20th Century Korea. So I had to decide what I would include in that course. Okay, the kimchi refrigerator is a good one. Rice cooker, actually invented in Japan, but fine. We now make better rice cookers now. So, what? Yeah, well, yeah, ship making. Korea is well known for its capacity in building huge ships. Now some of these Korean companies are actually going to the United States to build ships for them. So, gene copying. I mean, so some of the items that has been brought up can easily fit in the global narrative as well. So do we really? So we have to decide: do we really want to include a uniquely Korean technology such as the kimchi refrigerator, or something else? Do we want a more broad-based list? So. In 2011, when I first came back, I started reading on what had been written on this topic, and let me tell you a little bit about what I discovered in the secondary literature at the time. An archetypal example would be the 1997 publication titled Imitation to Innovation by the management scholar Lin-Soo Kim, the late Lin-Soo Kim, focusing on three most successful industrial sectors, the automobile, electronics, and semiconductors. Lin-Soo Kim traced how Korean engineers acquired the technological capabilities that allowed them to make the transition from imitators to innovators. So that's the kind of the standard story of technology in Korea. Within this framework, imitation was treated as an uninteresting prelude in the unrelenting march toward innovation. So imitation was regarded as a temporary state that must be overcome as soon as possible if we were to preserve our national pride. From the present day perspective, where Korea is cast as one of the most innovative countries in the world, I don't know exactly what the criteria were, but in this case, according to Nature magazine, Korea is one of the most innovative countries in the world. This triumphalist narrative of casting South Korean experience as once being an imitator, but now has emerged as a major innovator in the world, seems to make perfect sense. However, I'd like to point out that there are several problems with this, and that would be the topic and major argument of my talk today. Some problems with the imitation to innovation framework. To begin with, it depicts a linear progression from an inferior state of imitation to a superior state of innovation, which might not seem to be a major problem for most of you, but historians, professional historians, usually hate the assumption that there is a kind of a predetermined path along which we all go through in historical change. But that's our problem, not yours. So, more seriously, it opens the window for only a narrow slice of the overall technological experience, as practiced by South Koreans. Of course, there have been successful cases of innovation that contributed immensely to national development, but throughout its modern history, technological innovation in South Korea that we can all agree to celebrate should be seen as a relatively rare event. So what are the penicillins and the atomic bombs and transistors and integrated circuits, computers, internet, all invented in the United States, or as we know it, what are the equivalent cases of South Korea? And that is a relatively rare event, which is understandable considering that the nation was a relative latecomer in the game of Western-style industrialization after suffering more than 3 decades of colonial rule and a bloody civil war in the 1950s. And this is probably why we have some problems and difficulties coming up with an equivalent list of significant technological innovations in South Korea. And of course, the innovation-centric framework is useful in part because it is so widely accepted. Notably, it helps those outside of Korea place the Korean cases on their mental map by searching for prominent achievements. So when I meet my foreign colleagues, those who are interested in history of science and technology, but not particularly knowledgeable in the South Korean cases, I sometimes feel the need to respond to their curiosities, and I'm only half joking when I say that foreigners are curious about 3 things when it comes to South Korea. So on South Korean technology, they're interested in Samsung Electronics and how they became such a success in semiconductors and smartphones. On the history of science, they are interested in this person. I don't know if you remember this person. Dr. Hwang Woo-seok in 2005 and his dramatic rise and precipitous fall of Hwang Woo-seok. Okay, and this one turned out to be a complete hoax, but everyone at that time was quite impressed during the rise phase of Hwang. And finally, on medicine, they're interested in how plastic surgery has become so widespread and capable. So, And many scholars have worked on these topics, and there has been a lot written about these cases. But why? Why are they interested in this? Precisely because they represent unique cases that are unfamiliar to the Western and Euro-American eyes, yet no one can deny the significance of these cases. So they are curious and they want answers to these curiosities. So we, as a historian of technology, we tend to search for these unique cases, things that are unlike what one usually finds in other parts of the world. And of course, this is a widespread tendency, again, in many so-called peripheral contexts in Asia, Latin America, and in some parts of Europe as well. The focus on uniqueness helps one situate one's findings by creating simple puzzles. So why did a certain artifact take the unique form and design? Why did people use certain artifacts in these unique ways? And to answer these questions, one can resort to specific local circumstances in, for example, South Korea, or historical context. In other words, it is relatively easy to formulate questions that are, or at least seem, worth asking. Okay? And it seems answerable. Right? And within history of technology, one can find numerous examples that fit this bill. And these stories search for the exceptional and unique cases of technological innovation and adaptation that follow a unique pathway worthy of explanation. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad thing, just that this approach fails to capture the entirety of the technological experience in South Korea, and of course, as well as most non-Western countries. So if we only search for the unique cases, we miss out a lot of the things that we actually experience. Like today, we're all sitting on a chair and a desk. You see LED lights that we use every day, computers that we did not invent originally. So how can we capture all these and tell a comprehensive story of technology in South Korea is something that I am very interested in. Furthermore, the focus on uniqueness helps register the Korean cases within the global chronicle of technology. So let me illustrate with a small example. The electric rice cooker, which had been brought up earlier, was first developed in Japan in the 1950s and quickly spread to other parts of Asia. Other parts of Asia that ate a lot of rice, of course, naturally. Hong Kong and Taiwan were among the first adoptees of the Japanese product. And this is from my Taiwanese colleague who has studied the Taiwanese rice cookers, and an illustration of that. Engineers and entrepreneurs in the two countries went on to devise adaptations to the original Japanese design to suit their own culinary needs. So the food was different, so the rice cooker design had to change slightly. Historian Yoshiko Nakano Yoshiko is a Japanese historian working in Hong Kong University, tells the global history of the rice cooker in her book. Where there are Asians, there are rice cookers. So she traces the story of the rice cookers from Japan to Hong Kong and Taiwan to the United States. As the Chinese population immigrated to the United States, they brought their rice cookers with them. So in this book, Nakano, so when I read this book, I was naturally interested in what was she talking about, the Korean case. She only briefly touches on Korea as she describes the smugglers and peddlers of Japanese products in the 1970s and 80s. Okay? And those of you, and I think most of you are my age or above, will remember the popularity of the Japanese rice cookers in Korea, thermos bottles, lunch boxes for middle school and high school students during the 1970s and 80s. Okay, and then the next part where Korea appears in this story was in the 1990s, where she notes, and I quote, "A few South Korean brands succeeded in developing their own localized rice cookers." So here she is referring to the rise of the Cuckoo brand, which is now almost ubiquitous in Korean households. In other words, South Korea registered in this global historical narrative only when it began to exhibit uniqueness. Right? It has to be different. By pursuing localization or adaptation to the original Japanese design. And until then, South Korea had no place in this story. Even though Koreans were making and using them since at least the 1960s. And in the first cover slide, you have seen an old Korean woman in the 1960s looking at a new electric rice cooker, trying to figure out how to use them. And I'll go into slightly more detail into this story later in this lecture. So to summarize, the emphasis on uniqueness is an easy way to pick your research topic and present it to audiences outside of Korea. The problem, and I say this again, is that the cases selected through this method do not represent the entirety of the technological landscape as experienced by everyday South Koreans. So how can we do this then? So here is my proposal. This is not a perfect proposal, but what if we begin with the premise that no innovation occurred in South Korea, that all technologies were importations or imitations. Okay, this may be an extreme corrective with problems of its own, but I believe that it has some benefits to our understanding of the history of technology. By getting rid of innovation as a focus, we can begin to observe the diversity of the technological practices for what they were, rather than searching for the elusive and exceptional cases of innovation in Korean history. So for example, I have worked on the history of power tillers called gyeonggi in Korea, which were small-scale agricultural machines, basically a tractor with two wheels. So on the foreground, you see an array of power tillers. You can see that they have two wheels with a person guiding the direction. In the background, you see a four-wheel tractor. Okay, so that's the difference. Tractor has four wheels, power tillers have two. So these machines help replace animal and human power. The machine was introduced to Korea in 1963 through a technical cooperation agreement between a small Korean company called Daedong Industries, Daedong Gongop, and Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a Zaibatsu firm in Japan, large conglomerate. So when this machine hit the market, the Korean government and media praised this as the first Korean power tiller, 국산 경운기, right? However, the Korean company had merely assembled parts imported from Mitsubishi. Initially, more than 90% of the parts were imported. Then, the Korean government and industry pursued import substitution of machine parts with exceptional zeal, raising what they call the indigenization ratio, defined by the proportion of the number of parts manufactured within Korea to 92% by 1971, aiming to reach 100% by 1973. Still, the end product, and this is a newspaper ad in a Korean newspaper put up by Mitsubishi and its Korean partner firm. you can see the model number as CT83. So that's a Mitsubishi model. And the Daedong Industries model was also CT83. So it was exactly the same model using parts provided by Mitsubishi, although the import substitution occurred in the early 1970s. So from the perspective of uniqueness, the power tillers used by the Korean farmers in the 60s and 70s were exactly the same, or almost exactly the same, as what the Japanese farmers were using in Japan. So from the perspective of uniqueness, there would be little more to say here. So this would be regarded as an uninteresting case for most historians of technology. But as we all know, the power tiller completely transformed the rural landscape in South Korea. The number grew steadily until the late 1990s, until almost every rural household owned at least one power tiller, usually painted in bright red, bright orange. So orange was Daedongongup's signature color, and still is. And if you drive along Nambusunanno near Yesurei Jandang, you see Daedonggongup's display shop, and they have a bright orange signature color. In fact, there were so many of them scattered around that we have come to see them almost as a transportation device, right? Which was not the original intent of this machine, right? So the original intent was like this, but now people used it like this. So farmers have used them for as portable motors, sometimes connected to various accessory devices that help with diverse tasks required in the countryside. Okay. So that's the story of the power tiller. What happened then with the rice cookers during the 1970s and 80s? So these were the two Japanese rice cookers from the 1950s. So one is from National and the other from Toshiba. So this Toshiba model was one of the original rice cookers that was invented in 1955. Then, this one is from Taiwan, manufactured by a company called Tatung Industries. By coincidence, the name is exactly the same as the Korean power tiller company. The first Korean rice cooker came out in 1966 from Goldstar or Kumsong-sa, present-day LG Electronics, through a technical agreement with Hitachi. And note that they all look kind of similar, right? And for good reason, because they were all copying the Japanese original. Kumsong-sa soon pulled out of this market, which was rapidly filled with smaller companies like these, each with ties with Japanese companies like Sanyo, in this case. Hanil was a fairly well-known small to medium-sized company that specialized in rice cooker products. Taiwan was also well-known. In this case, they have a technical agreement with a Japanese company called Naigai. Sanyo and National, in the 1970s, the quality, or at least the reputation of the Korean rice cookers was so bad. So these products were regarded as junk products almost, that many middle-class households opted for imported Japanese rice cookers, which was recognized as a social problem. And this picture is from Gimpo International Airport in the early 1980s, showing the customs line packed with Japanese rice cookers that people brought back whenever they had a chance to visit Japan. And this was reported in a Japanese newspaper and was made known to a Korean newspaper, which sparked the Korean Blue House to embark on a technological development plan to localize and to develop rice cooker technologies. The Hong Kong historian Nakano Yoshiko was referring to this phenomenon when she brought up the smugglers and peddlers, right? So what did people do with all these rice cookers? They used one for themselves. They gave it away to family members, and sometimes even sold it to the black market in Namdaemun, and you can get Japanese rice cookers if you pay slightly more. The Korean effort to develop its own rice cooker technology began in the early 1980s as a response to this social phenomenon. However, the goal was to make a rice cooker that performed just as well as the Japanese products. So here, this is a page from the final report. They are comparing 3 different products. So a prototype product A, which was developed by the Korean engineers. The Japanese product is B, and the present product, the present Korean product, which had been manufactured by these small and medium-sized enterprises without the appropriate coating, and they cooked rice in it, and compared the quality of the rice in 6 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours, until 48 hours. And this picture, although the resolution is not perfect, you can see that the Korean product, the rice has gone dry and almost brown and black. A and B are comparably okay, right? And they were happy with this. And in the report, they wrote, the prototype rice cooker with PTFE resin coated developed in the study shows equivalent characteristics and performance in taste, smell, and humidity of rice, as well as non-stick property compared with Japanese products after an 84-hour conservation test. So the benchmark was the Japanese products that served as the goal that the Korean engineers aimed to reach. Note that the goal was not to make a product better suited to Korean dietary preferences. No female members were involved in this study. And Japanese products were regarded as the gold standard against which to gauge the quality of the Korean devices. And again, from the perspective of uniqueness, it is very difficult to say more about this. But you have to admit that the 2 stories, even though they were on virtually identical technological artifacts that could be found elsewhere in Japan, mostly, because Korea copied a lot of things from Japan. But these stories are quite interesting in and of themselves. Right? Both the power tiller and the electric rice cookers were widely used in South Korean farms and households, and transforming the ways in which Koreans practice agriculture and cooked rice. And in terms of technical practices, the power tiller story was one of import substitution of machine parts, which is an interesting story in and of itself. The rice cooker story, although I did not make it explicit when I explained it, was one of import substitution of patents. So there was a Japanese patent on PTFE coating on aluminum sheets. And the Korean firms had to pay royalty to use that patent. So the goal of the Korean engineers was to bypass the Japanese patent by developing their own technology. So although it looks like they are trying to imitate and copy exactly the same thing and want to reach the original model, they had their own goal in mind. So the technicians and engineers involved in the two stories were doing what they were doing not because they were necessarily incapable, but because they thought it was an effective way to solve the problems at hand using the resources available to them. And I think this is a pretty good definition of technology itself, is getting things done with the resources available. So if they could get things done by imitating other things, they imitated. If they wanted to reduce cost by bypassing Japanese patents, they worked on the technological capabilities that allowed them to do so. So the key here is understanding the kinds of problems that they wish to solve at specific time periods. And until the 1970s at least, imitating foreign products was good enough for the South Koreans, and that solved a lot of the problems that South Korea faced at that time. So in the mid-1970s, and that began to change slightly in the 70s and 80s and 90s, of course. In the mid-1970s, new approaches to technology began to appear. In 1973, for example, President Park Chung-hee signed a memorandum to promote the Korean automobile industry as part of the heavy and chemical industrialization plan. One of the goals was to discard the 20-year-old policy to localize foreign cars, which is the practice of assembling foreign models, usually licensing Japanese and American cars with minor modification. So many cars in automobiles in 1970s, 60s, and 70s in South Korea were actually like Ford models or Mitsubishi models that were brought into South Korea, assembled in Korean factories, but with a different brand attached to them. So these were the Korean automobile industry at the time. Toward moving to producing what they call the unique model automobile, called Goyu models. So Hyundai Motors responded to this new policy. In 1974, Hyundai announced a new model car called Pony One, which you see here, proudly exhibited in the National Museum of Contemporary History. But there is an irony of the Pony One. Despite the social and cultural meaning of Pony One as the penultimate Korean technology, the vehicle owed heavily to engineers and designers outside the country. The Pony was designed by a hired team of British engineers. The engines came from Mitsubishi. Many of its parts were reworked from Ford Motors parts. And its unique design was done by Ital Design Giugiaro, an Italian automobile designer of global fame, who is well known for designing the car that appeared in the movie Back to the Future. And there is a reason why the Pony looks a little bit like that car in the movie. Seen in this way, the Pony was an archetypal transnational technology created through a cooperation of a multinational team of designers and engineers. So why did Korea and Hyundai do this in the mid-1970s? Why did the Korean government want this unique model automobile? The answer was exports. Because if you manufacture and assemble a Mitsubishi car and produce it in Korea, you cannot export it to other countries. So they needed a unique model automobile to be able to export it to other countries. Therefore, it desperately needed the unique model. And to solve that problem, they brought in teams of experts from other countries to make that possible. Okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is that there are specific requirements at each time period that we need to respond to. And in the mid-1980s, a different kind of challenge emerged. The democratization movement of 1987 led to the rise of labor costs in South Korea, which in turn contributed to the expansion of the middle class. The new class wanted new and convenient things, ultimately leading to an expansion of the domestic market. So now we had to think about not only the export market, but also the domestic market as well. At the same time, the global environment shifted to emphasizing free trade, the so-called market liberalization, first led by Ronald Reagan, the US president, and then pushed further by subsequent American leaders as well. So here lay the challenge. Could Korean companies that had focused on the export market for the last 20 years now turn their attention to the domestic market? Would this require an entirely different outlook on technological and engineering practices? Would they be able to protect the domestic market against foreign competition? The electrical appliances industry serves as a good example, and during this period, companies like Kumsangsa struggled to develop new products labeled as Korean style. And here you see a small 한국형, right? Korean style became a major keyword in the late 1980s, and thus began a series of products throughout the 1990s that were tailored to the everyday lifestyles of South Koreans. And in this case is a water mop vacuum cleaner, which was one of the first, the so-called Korean style appliances developed by Kumsang, because the Korean households do not use carpets as much. We do not need the heavy vacuum cleaners that Americans usually use. We need to mop it down using a piece of cloth and to use water to clean the floors. This meant that Korean engineers could no longer simply imitate foreign products. They had to think about, okay, first, what the Korean customers want, how to realize them in real life, and then market them as a Korean style product. Okay, and of course, this is another ad from Kumsangsa on Korean style refrigerators, and of course, one can show a series of these ads, including the kimchi refrigerator in the 1990s, rice cookers that were tailored to the Korean taste, so on and so forth. So, to conclude, how can we tell the stories of technology in modern Korea? What should we include in the historical survey of technology in 20th century Korea? So I believe that we should include everything, right, that significantly changed the everyday lives of the Korean people, whether they were imitations of Japanese or American technologies. We use technologies to provide convenience to the customers and solve the pressing problems facing our society. So who first invented the technology is not an important criterion for inclusion or exclusion. So whether one is in Seoul or Tokyo, in Silicon Valley, Johannesburg, South Africa, or in Shenzhen, China, we all rely on the resources available to us to solve the problems that we are facing. So sometimes we imitate. If known solutions are not available, we have no choice but to devise a novel solution to the problem, as the Korean technicians and engineers did in the late 1980s and 90s. Collectively, we can call everything, all of them, the stories of technology that we should all try to remember and celebrate. Okay? Thank you.